With week 1 finished, you should now be an expert on the distributive property, combining like terms and simplifying expressions. We're going to move forward to looking at solving equations this week, but first we need to talk about what makes an equation an equation. An equation is a statement of equality. It shows that two different expressions are equal to each other, that they are the same. The only difference between an expression and an equation is the presence of an equal sign in an equation. Think equation means equal signs, whereas expressions are missing that equal sign. This video specifically will deal with the most basic of equations, which are one-step equations. Understanding how a basic one-step equation works will set you up for success when dealing with two or more complex equations that you will be seeing later this week and beyond in your future math life. So let's start with this equation. Now, it looks simple, right? X is clearly 2 here because 2 plus 3 is 5, right? But I want to focus on the idea of inverse operations. Equations are going to become way more complex heading forward, and we aren't going to be able to easily determine the answer by just looking at it and knowing it automatically. So we need to employ the power of inverse operations in order to solve. When you are trying to solve an equation, you want to isolate the variable, meaning you want to get it by itself on one side of the equal sign without any other numbers or signs on that same side. In this case, x isn't by itself because there is a constant of positive 3 or plus 3 on the same side of the equation. So your thought process should then be, how do I get rid of that positive 3 so that I can get x by itself? Or you can look at it as, what is the opposite or the inverse of adding 3? The answer to this question is either by adding a negative 3 or by subtracting 3. Adding a negative, remember, is the same as subtracting a positive. So when we make this move, we must also ensure we do the same thing, exact same thing, to both sides of the equation. Without doing that, we create an unbalanced, unequal equation. You're going to end up with the wrong answer. We don't want that. Here you can see by applying the inverse operation, we are left with x equals 2, which we already know is the correct answer, but we can plug in the solution of 2 back into the original equation for x just to make sure. Since 2 plus 3 does indeed equal 5, we know we solved the equation correctly. Take a look at this one. This time our variable is on the right side of the equal sign. This does not change our approach though. We know we still need to isolate g, which is our variable in this case, in order to solve the equation. In order to do this, I have to get rid of the constant of negative 4. Now the opposite of a negative 4 is having a positive 4. You can also look at this as the opposite of subtracting 4 is adding 4. So once we apply this inverse operation, negative 4 plus 4 results in a sum of 0. So that gets rid of that negative 4, which isolates g, which is good, right? That's our goal. But remember, we're not done because we have to do the exact same thing to the other side of the equation. 7 plus 4 gets 11. Therefore, you end up with an equation of 11 equals g, or g equals 11. You can just switch that around. It means the same exact thing. Now, we're going to plug in our solution into the original equation to make sure we did the problem and solve correctly. And 7 does equal 11 minus 4. Therefore, we know we solved our equation correctly. And that's a really cool thing about equations. You can always check that you got it right by plugging it in. So don't throw away that opportunity. Take that time to check that it's right, and you'll get it right 100% of the time. Now, in this example, our unknown is back on the left side. We know we have to isolate the variable to solve for n this time, but this time there is a coefficient present rather than a constant. Remember, coefficients are values that are being multiplied to variables that are directly touching them, indicating that multiplication. Also, remember, we have to solve using the inverse or opposite in order to isolate our variables. The opposite of multiplication in mathematics is division. Therefore, we are going to divide by 2 to isolate the n. To even be more specific here, the reason we do this is not just because division is the opposite of multiplication, But because by dividing a number, in this case the number is 2, by itself, so dividing 2 by 2, it results in a quotient of 1, which is 1n. And that is our entire goal, is to find the value of just 1n, or n, because 1n and n are the same thing. So dividing by 2 allows us to do that. Now, I'm just going to drop the 1, as I just said, because when your coefficient is 1, you don't have to write it. 1n and n are the same thing. But we aren't done. N is not simply negative 18, because we have to do the same thing to both sides of the equation. So we must divide negative 18 by 2 as well to keep the balanced equation. And using my integer rules, negative 18 divided by 2 results in a quotient of negative 9. Therefore, I end up with n equaling negative 9. I'm going to plug this solution back into my original equation for my variable to make sure it's correct. And because 2 times negative 9 does result in a product of negative 18, I know that I solved my equation correctly yet again, and I'm 2 for 2 so far. Now, for this next slide, you have a few examples here on the screen. What I want you to do is pause the video and work through these independently. I will give you a hint for the last one. A fraction bar indicates division. So I want you to think about how you undo division. So think about what's the opposite of division. Also, make sure you're practicing the skill of using inverses to solve. Don't just look at it and guess and put numbers in. Use the inverses or opposites to solve. It's definitely going to come in handy later when the equations get far more complex. I'll be back with you in a moment so you're able to check your work. You can now see the different solutions on the screen. Make sure you take time to check each question to make sure it's correct. Also, make sure you're always reaching out with questions. If you are confused and you're not sure why you got something wrong, I'm here for you guys. I'm here to support you guys. Do not forget to take time to practice as well. In addition to this video, in addition to those few examples, practice leads to success and continual growth. If you are ready to move on and have practice, I suggest you move forward to the two-step equation video, which is titled Video 7, Two-Step Equations.